All right, this is part 2 of graphing sine and cosine functions. We had just finished in the previous video with this graphing problem where we were graphing the sine function with the following transformations. So we're going to try another one. This one, again, we're graphing two periods of y equals -3 cosine of x minus pi over 4. Okay, so I'm going to kind of talk you guys through this one again, and then our final example I'll have you guys work on. So first things first, so I'm going to have you do part of it on your own, actually. First things first is I want you to, over here, identify all of those characteristics. So the vertical shift, the amplitude period, horizontal shift, and the intervals. So let's have you guys fill that out on your own, and then together we'll practice graphing it. Okay, so put me on pause. All right, let's see if you got this right. So vertical shift was 0, amplitude is 3. Even though it's negative, remember amplitude's positive, always. Period is 2 pi, because we get 2 pi divided by 1. Horizontal shift, our starting x value will be at pi over 4, and the intervals are pi over 2. So again, remembering what this means, we're going to start at pi over 4, and the next one will be pi over 2 or 2 pi over 4 away from that starting one. So let's draw our axes. Remember that there was no horizontal shift, so our what did I refer to in the last video? Something about the ground. But you know, our middle ground, that's what I said. Middle ground is at 0, okay? Our amplitude goes to 3 and -3. Okay? And remember that our starting x is at pi over 4. Okay? But we have intervals of pi over 2. So my next interval, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so our next intervals, I'm going to have to do pi over 4 plus pi over 2, which is 3 pi over 4, because they got to be pi over 2 apart. So pi over 2 apart, next would be 5 pi over 4, and I'm going to keep going. Okay, so we did that. Next, remember our starting value is at pi over 4, okay? So somewhere along here. Now because this is cosine, a cosine graph, normally we would start at 1, or in this case it's 3. But since it's -3, we actually are going to be reversed. So starting at -3. Then the rest of it is just the same. So plotting 5 points would give us 1 period. Plotting 9 points would give us 2 periods, which is what it asked us to do. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to have you guys try this one on your own, like the full thing. So as always, start by identifying your characteristics here, and then let's try graphing it. One thing to keep in mind is this will have a vertical shift. So that middle ground that I was talking about now, your amplitude's got to go however many above 3 and however many below 3. So let's see what you guys can do, and we'll go from there. At minimum on your own, identify the characteristics, okay? If you're not going to graph it on your own, at least identify these. Okay, so I haven't quite finished my graph yet. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But let's talk about these things first and then check out how I've set this up. So like we said, the vertical shift will be 3. Amplitude is +2. The period is 2 pi over pi. I'll talk more about that in a second, which is 2. The horizontal shift, I set this whole thing equal to 0, and we get 1/2, which means we're starting at 1/2. That's our starting x value. And the intervals will be a half apart. So notice here that, my intervals were pretty self-explanatory, right? I'm starting at 1/2, and my intervals are a half apart. They don't have to have pi, right? These are also numbers. And then we said that it's a vertical shift of 3. So instead of our middle ground that we always come back to 0, it's now going to come back to 3. Okay? So I like to always draw like a dashed line for it. You don't have to. I wouldn't mark it wrong. I just think it's really nice to see that because it's just a reminder once you start putting the pieces together. Our amplitude is up to and down to from the vertical shift. And now last but not least, okay, it's a sine graph. So normally that would start at 0. So really it's going to start at 3 this time. And it's positive, so I can go up. This is not drawn to scale, FYI. Okay. All right. One thing I want to let you guys know of is that when we have this form, pi x minus pi over 2, hold on, I need some space here, that bx minus c, setting that equal to 0, sorry, getting this b value for our period is the same as if they had something factored out, like x minus c over b. Okay, so if it's still given in this form, in either of these forms, your leading coefficient is still b. So don't think that if it's like factored out that you have to do anything crazy with it. It's still going to be that b value. Okay. All right, so in conclusion, amplitude, we should know how to find all of these things. I'd like you guys to fill this, well, I guess you don't have space in your notes, but you guys can figure this out, right? Amplitude is the absolute value of A. Period is the absolute value of 2 pi over B. The vertical shift, what's being added or subtracted. Oops, it's a minus sign. Okay, now that doesn't look anything close like it. Plus or minus C. The horizontal shift, remember you have to set bx minus c equal to 0. And then we talked about all those graphing strategies. Thanks for listening.